Hey, greetings, everybody. My name is Chase Wilhelm. I currently serve as the Chief of Chaplains for the Illinois Department of Corrections, as well as the Deputy Command Chaplain of the Army Reserve Element at United States Special Operations Command. I'm a 14-year Army chaplain by craft and trade, and have recently left active duty and became the Chief Chaplain for the Illinois Department of Corrections, as I mentioned. And I want to say thank you for allowing me the opportunity to join you and to share this time in this space, even virtually this weekend. And thank you to Michelle, a colleague, a fantastic friend that I attended seminary with at Eden Theological. So she reached out to me and inquired if I would take a moment and share some of my recent experiences of life and traveling and chaplaincy work to some degree there. Recently, about 2 months ago, I took it upon myself to travel to Poland and into the borderlands with Ukraine. I have previously been stationed, not really deployed, but stationed and mobilized to Poland and to Eastern Europe, and some friends and some assets there that I've maintained over the years of my time in service. And over the course, the duration of the initial invasion and the aggression of Russia into Ukraine, it's really, on the fence, just in terms of being called and being pulled to do something, right? As we all are, something. And there's so many some things we can do for so many things. So before I go into the weeds on that trip and some of the experiences that I had there and the families that impacted me and the lives that I was able to come alongside, I definitely want to be very clear. You can, this shouldn't come as a surprise, you can throw a dart right now and find suffering around our world. Suffering in a very particular form of aggression and military action as well. I cannot speak about what's taking place in Ukraine without recognizing and acknowledging the ongoing and what seems to be endless suffering and aggression in Palestine. I can't talk about Ukraine without acknowledging and recognizing what's taking place in Yemen, all along sub-Saharan Africa, and as well, to a lesser degree, but as well in Southeast Asia, Myanmar, Burma, some places there. So the pain and the suffering of our call, if you share it with me, to beat our swords into plowshares isn't localized. And I don't want to move forward with the perceived notion that I believe that Ukraine has a monopoly on this particular plague that haunts us. The plague that we are called to work against, violence, particularly militarized violence, right? So I just want to acknowledge and take a moment in time to recognize that what's taking place in Ukraine is not in particularly unique. There are men and women around our globe who are suffering from actions of military aggression. But for me and for my connection that I had to Eastern Europe and to Poland and to Ukraine, there was a uniqueness having served in Afghanistan, having bought into this notion, right, of this broader liberal idealism, to watch a fellow nation state and the people of that country suffer in such a particular way, where democracy is really under the blade. I felt called to go. Now, I would not advise to anyone to do what I did. I think we have to also recognize and understand, and I spent a few days, almost a week or so, in discernment about going as well, because there's a very, very fine line between humanitarian voyeurism, right, and actually showing up. I saw it in Afghanistan. I've seen it around the globe. Too often, sites of trauma can become stations of tourism. And we have to be very careful that we're not entering into a voyeuristic space with the heartbreak and the suffering of people's lives. And it doesn't demand a war to sort of check ourselves when we enter into those certain situations, right? You have to understand when you go into a space, it can be something as simple as, I shouldn't say simple, but as localized as, a post-tornado or a domestic natural disaster type situation. Why are you going and what are you going to do? Are you going because you need to fill something in your heart, or are you going to fill a purpose, right? And sometimes it's okay if there's a mishmash and a combination of that. That needs to sort of also bookend our story here. And it would be my call and my challenge to anybody that I tell my stories to is to, before you step, right? Because I think Michelle can back me up on this. When we were in seminary, we were taught when you pray, you move your feet, right? Before you move the feet, though, and as you're praying, you have to deeply and uniquely, heartfeltly, soulfully consider why are you doing what you're doing? We live in a virtual world of instant gratification and Instagram and Facebook likes, right? So what are we doing? And why are we doing it? So upon some discernment and some reflection, I gathered my things and I made some phone calls and I made some connections. And took a one-way flight into Warsaw. Didn't really have a game plan in terms of return time. Knew I would return, but wasn't on the board. Was showing up in the space, ready to be told to get to work or to even potentially go home. You have to understand, when you show up into these situations, you don't want to be in the way. Right? You need to offer something. You need to be prepared to not be a savior. Just a wheel and the machine of support and help, hopefully, right? So after tactically acquiring a station wagon and leaving Warsaw and heading east and south and towards the border, was met with a level of both suffering, yes, but also response, particularly from the Polish community and the Polish people, that was astounding. You see, all across that, 500, however many mile long border that Poland shares with Ukraine, each and every tiny little village had come together. So it's pretty well tradition in Eastern Europe, as it is in many places around the globe, that before you show up to somebody's house, regardless of what the situation is, you bring something, even it's a little piece of chocolate or a gift or an acknowledgement of being hosted. Right? So we stopped. Some of my assets and my team that I was working with when I was over there, we stopped and we grabbed feminine hygiene products, supplies, and some diapers. Very elementary, very baseline, not a lot. Really wanted to get a bandwidth grasp of what was necessary first before we just show up with stuff. We get to a small little village, and there's a community center there, and that's where the refugees, the Ukrainians, are being processed by the Polish National Police and the local community. We come and we have our boxes of diapers and feminine hygiene products, and I find an individual and we're translating in broken Polish and English, and we're here and we want to donate these things, right? And somebody nods and points us up to an anteroom upstairs. So we make our way upstairs and we head up there, and there in the basically a huge sort of second story gymnasium space was a room from floor to ceiling, full of feminine hygiene products and diapers, right? And one very old man who is in the midst of the pile of all these donated items, who just looks up and sees more people with diapers and grunts and points, right? And I tell that to really paint a picture of material items wasn't necessarily the demand signal, wasn't necessarily the need in that moment. And later come to find out the reason that that particular facility had so many diapers and so many feminine hygiene products is going back to all those little villages along the border. They had all the mayors basically set up a WhatsApp chat with each other. And if one village was short on something, they would pull from another village. And there were certain villages that had an overwhelming abundance of particular items, and people were being routed there. So if one village was short on blankets or short on shoes or short on this supply or that supply, this village would have it. And every single day, villagers, townsfolk, average men and women of all ages, would take a couple hours out of their day and drive. Go down to their local civic center or city municipal building, look at the list of what needed to go where and what needed to be brought back, and make it happen. People were finding a way to respond in a very genuine, non-politicized way that wasn't begging for Facebook likes, wasn't looking to make the papers, was looking to do what was needed in that moment, was looking to move their feet when they prayed. It was from that location that we were able to find our first family, and I spent about 16 hours behind the windshield driving a mother and her 3 children, as along with 3 of her nieces, nephews. There were two women, and one was pregnant, and they were sisters, and they each had about 3 or 4 kids, and then one of them had a baby, and when it came time to load everything into the station wagon, right, like space, that's what we're going for here. It looked like the Eastern European Wish version of a Griswold family vacation, right? There's me and the station wagon packed full of kids and luggage on the top. And as we were getting everyone into the vehicle, the pregnant woman realized she can take a seat. Or 2 other children can take that seat where she sits, right? To get them to safety. What do you do, right? It's nothing for me to do. Right? You look in the rearview mirror as you drive away with the children that she was willing to lay and risk her life for, to make sure that they could get to safety as well. See, these acts of sacrifice, of commitment towards a better tomorrow, in the face of all that is happening, right? Particularly on this Memorial Day weekend. So those acts, I'll never know that woman's name. I'll never see her again. But I can see her eyes. I can see the pain, yes. Stoic suffering, but also the willingness to enter into that notion of there is no greater love, right? Than to do what? I want to remind us, in the face of all the despair, in the face of the atrocities that are taking place, in the face of the suffering that is global, as well as acute, to whatever position or hour we find ourselves in life, let's not overlook that there is goodness. Now, I do not believe in turning lemons into lemonade, and I'm not trying to find a silver lining. I'm trying to reframe and reorient our vision through this haze of suffering that seems to be endless. And again, particularly on this Memorial Day weekend. To cut through the evil and the pain and the suffering, and to see the tiny flames. To know that if we recognize those tiny flames, small spaces of light, to know that once we start to see those, the evil and the suffering and the feeling of being overwhelmed can be held at bay, right? For we are called to live into that and through that. Yes, we are called to come into those spaces of suffering, those spaces of trial, regardless of your faith tradition. I think that we are called and set in those spaces, yes, but we are also called to recognize goodness where we see it, to honor, pay homage, and offer memory to those who have been willing to live into that notion of offering no greater love. Something I think that we can live into, that is not relegated, that is not a distant and impossible task, and doesn't demand or take you hopping on a plane and flying to Warsaw to do. I think if there's any takeaway from the hundreds of thousands of people that I met that are over there, that are actively continuing to do what I did and engaged in Ukraine, the lives of those that we pay silence and memorial to this weekend, it is to remain committed in the space that we can have some measure of impact and control in, right? You know, the army adage of take care of your foxhole first, right? And in speaking to some of the Ukrainians when I was there and dropping these families off and asking them, what more can we do? What message would you like me to take back? There was oftentimes a repeated, obviously once the thank yous were provided, there was a repeated mantra of tell your people to love their people. What better way to honor, to pay homage to the goodness that is taking place, again, particularly on this weekend, and to find a way to love our people. How you do that, I'll leave that up to you. That is my call, that is my reminder for all of us, that perhaps in some very minor way we can find just one more way to love our people. So know that you are beloved. And I thank you for the love that you provide me. Again, you're in good hands with Michelle. It's my hope that perhaps someday I can meet you in person. And thank you for your time. Thank you for what you do for the communities that you find yourself in. And until then, be well.